What was something you wrongly guessed as very expensive cheap when you were a child? I always thought Viennetta ice cream was so posh and expensive. I feel this. My great-grandmother would always have it and I thought it was some sort of posh ice cream. Similarly, I always thought Neapolitan ice cream must have been the apex of ice cream decadence and expense. Because you got not one, not two, but 3 flavors in one tub. I still believe it. Sad face. This was our fancy once a year at Christmas treat. It still feels wrong to eat it when it's not a special occasion. Because it is posh. Do they still make it? I had completely forgotten about it until just now. To be honest, it was quite expensive when it first came out. But it has been cheapened to the point of now being a crappy budget item. I remember being so disappointed with the taste when I finally got to try it. Rugs! Exclamation mark. Why are rugs so f***ing expensive? That rug's got to be $40 maybe. $395? It's only 5 feet wide. Even as an adult, this shocks me. I went to buy a rug for home at a store that was going out of business. I found one I liked. It had a tag for $300 and the other tag for 80% off. I do the math in my head and am satisfied. But when I checked out, I discovered the rug was $300 after the 80% off. So this rug is normally over $2,000? Edit. I get it. I'm bad at math. My mother keeps trying to get me to buy some nice area rugs. I keep thinking to myself, why? I have kids. Why would I buy something so expensive that they're just going to ruin? If they were cheaper, sure, but they aren't. I can spend that insane amount of money on something a lot more practical. Like clothes and shoes and food and school supplies and all those blasted fundraisers. Same. When I was a kid I figured super fancy rugs might be expensive. But my mind was blown when I realized even a completely boring beige rug might be something to budget for. This is why I have a rug I kinda hate. It was £20 on Facebook and now I can't justify spending money on a new one when it's literally fine. I just am sick of it. There's a rug store near my house that is selling a 100-year-old Middle Eastern rug for $37,000. Lots of other rugs too for $2,000 and up. All handmade and very pretty. But like, WTH. I have kind of a funny story that is related. I got an allowance even when I was really young. But it was only a few dollars a week. When I was probably 6 or 7 we were at the mall and I saw a sign for golden retriever puppies for $299. Naturally I assumed this was $2.99. I went into the store and proudly put $3 on the counter only to be told I would need a lot more than that. As an adult, I also look back and I can't imagine what my parents would have done if I had somehow had enough to purchase a dog despite the fact that we already had 2 at the time. I did something similar. When I was around 7 or so, we met a friendly man on a ferry during a family trip and at some point during the conversation, he mentioned that he was a dog breeder. My mom asked him how much he typically sells his puppies for and he said something like $299. I was like, I want to buy one. I have the money. Quote, assuming it was $2.99. Nowadays, it's probably next to impossible to find a breeder that will sell a dog to you at that price. $299 sounds like a legit steal. It never occurred to me that some food was more expensive than other food. I 100% thought my mom made spaghetti all the time because it was her favorite. I was much older when I realized it was because it would feed a lot of people very cheap. My mom was dead broke and couldn't afford to buy anything with the money she was making, so she sold her blood and plasma. So hers was pretty valuable to buy spaghetti and cheap sauce. That was my breakfast and dinner for so many months. I have so much respect for spaghetti, but I can never eat it again. Spaghetti is amazing too though. The cost of building a fort that connected my backyard to my friend's backyard still hasn't happened. For us it was a network of underground tunnels and radios. We got as far as the radios. Well, don't give up now. This was the dream, and a whole pneumatic tunnel system that we could use to share food and toys. The dentist didn't think I'd be in debt from getting teeth fixed. This right here hits home. My husband and I are having to take turns with the dentist this year. He needs more work, so I'm going to let him go first once things open up, because we can't afford for us both to go. Luckily, I just need a few fillings. He needs a root canal and a crown. He had a bunch of work done last year too. I don't even know why we have dental insurance if it covers so little. Study colleague of mine tripped and fell down her staircase. It ends up in both of her upper front teeth dying. A dead tooth basically turns gray and is always at high infection risk. Insurance didn't cover any of the costs of restoring her teeth because they saw it as plastic surgery instead of reconstructive surgery. Yeah, 'cause walking around with two black front teeth definitely won't ruin your life. Welcome to Finland. No need for dental insurances or similar since a regular checkup is around $9. However, you have to queue approximately 2 to 3 months before you can get an appointment with a dentist. LMAO, no doubt, from the land of the free food in the cupboard fridge. When you're young, a lot of the time it's just there. When you get older, especially when you move out, you realize how much money your parents spent to keep you fed. Not just fed, but often your favorite snacks and stuff too. My mom always made sure to have specifically the Scooby-Doo fruit snacks even though they were more expensive. I can't believe the amount of money my parents spent on packaged foods like granola bars, etc. I have only bought that stuff for myself a handful of times as an adult. Unless you grew up poor. Yeah, I didn't move out until my early 20s and was kind of shocked at how expensive some of my favorite name brand cereals were. Not to mention how expensive frozen foods are. Food coloring and fondant icing for baking. Thought it was so expensive, and that's why only fancy cakes used them. Turns out they cost like £1 each. Ew, fondant. Turns out they cost like £1 each. What? Where? I bought fondant for a wedding cake I made. First and last. It was $120 for the 2 large tubs. I buy the Wilson food coloring. They're $5 for each little container. Only shitty wannabe fancy cakes use fondant. Ones for kids or the cake makers stuck in the 90s. These days it's all about entremets, mirror glaze, puff pastry, eclairs and tarts in Europe, or buttercream art in the Anglosphere, ranging from minimalist to over the top. When I was a child, I thought an average car costs like $100K. Welcome to Singapore. I recently found out that a Corvette starts around $60,000. I assumed for years they started well over $100,000. Still don't have the money to buy one. You didn't stay homesick and watch The Price is Right as much as I did. When I was a kid, I could probably give you a more accurate estimate on a Toyota than I could for an expensive toy. Houses used to think they were like £500. I had no idea renting was a thing. Growing up, my parents and I lived in a house given to my mom by her parents, so I thought everyone just owned the houses they lived in. When my friend was moving down the street because their lease was up, I was so confused. Well, if you live in Detroit, in Monopoly, yes, I knew how much houses cost, but I was convinced people just generally had much more money than they actually do. I believed mortgages are for very poor people only, or that those who need to get a mortgage are just being naive with their money. Like, you need to pay additional percent to a bank. Why do you do that instead of just saving for longer? Or are too lazy to save? Edit. It turned out the reality was that I had a rich above average income kid syndrome because my family never used mortgages and is generally anti-bankers. Edit 2. I was also convinced all Americans are super wealthy relative to us in Central, Eastern Europe. Making a quick calculation, an average house in the US cost $150,000, while an average American made $50,000 a year. so clearly they could save up for a house in just 3 years. Same calculation yielded 5 to 6 years for my country after I asked my parents how much an average person here makes a month. As a child, I had no idea taxes are a thing and didn't factor in the fact that you also need to pay utilities, food, transportation and other life expenses. My mom's first house was under £1,000 that my parents bought in the early 60s. Legos. Those things are expensive. I'm looking at you USC Millennium Falcon. My kids like to read the Lego catalog, pick out sets they want, and then go count the money in their piggy bank to see if they have enough. They are disappointed almost every time. Agreed. Even the smaller sets are like 15 to 20 bucks. General priced according to how many pieces, plus a licensing fee, where applicable. So the Saturn V is a fair bit cheaper than a Star Wars kit with the same number of pieces. Disney movies. I grew up poor and my dad would always get the forgettable off-brand versions of popular cartoon movies, instead of The Hunchback of Notre Dame. For example, I'd get to see The Secret of the Hunchback. Lots and lots of that. When I saw a kid who owned a real Disney movie on VHS, I assumed they were very rich. I didn't realize you could buy several in 1 month and not have to declare bankruptcy even without being rich. I think there's some accuracy to this. Studio movie VHS cost like $90 plus in the 80s because they were sold to video rental stores. If it was a knockoff, it was way cheaper. And then that changed sometime in the early 90s, I think. I definitely remember being at someone's house and thinking they were super rich because they had like 5 VHS movies. Oh man, there are so many off-brand movies I watched as a kid that no one has ever heard of. Perk of growing up poor, I guess. Figured credit cards meant infinite money. Turns out they do for a little bit if you're real stupid. Which I was. Whenever my daughter asks me to buy something and I say I have no money, she always says, "But Mom, just go to the ATM and get cash out." I wish that's how it worked. A friend of mine used to work in a call center for Capital One. She once spoke to a young woman who thought that was how credit cards actually worked. The woman had called because she kept trying to use her card and it was declined. When my friend told her it was because she had maxed it out and needed to pay the balance, she replied with, "But doesn't it like refill every month?" Quote, "I thought it was a card allowing you not to pay anything. I wanted one so bad. But it seems they downgraded it to a pay more later thing now." Growing up sucks. Ditto. Also had zero clue what APR was. In college at age 19 I made the mistake of taking bait from Bank of America on a 0% APR credit card, targeted specifically at college kids. 6 months later my interest rate was at 32%. Paying the minimum, even double the minimum, wasn't working. I stopped paying it, defaulted, ignored the phone calls, pretended it didn't exist. It was my fault, but this debt completely ruined my 20s. At 31 I had now a good job for a couple of years and finally freed myself of debt. Finally approved for credit cards, buying a car, etc. Now 34, my credit is just only decent. But I'm getting there. I feel like this has followed me forever. Probably the worst mistake of my life. Going out to anything other than fast food was an expensive night out. Even Applebee's. Yeah, fast food is expensive too when you have a family. Thinking about my family's income, I'm shocked we ever went out. I grew up in a fairly poor rural place and we went to Applebee's for prom. And totally thought it was high-class dining. If you got a kid's menu, it was high-class dining. I'd take a Friendly's Conehead sundae over any fancy restaurant. Always had sparkling grape juice as kids, but only for New Year's. Seemed like such a lavish bottle. They're cheap as hell, but only having it that often made it feel so special. I only ever had grape juice when I was invited round my grandma's for dinner. I also considered it quite special and mine wasn't even sparkling. College. My oldest brother and all his friends went to college, never mentioning the expense. As a kid, I thought it must be cheap because all the guys are doing it. Depending on how old you are, you're probably right. Even adjusted for inflation, higher education costs have gone up a few 100% since the 70s, 80s. In recent times, they have outpaced wages about 8 to 1. Back then it was actually possible to work your own way through college. Or for middle-class parents with good savings discipline to pay their kids' tuition. And nobody would have to take out an outrageous loan that follows them for the rest of their life. College used to be cheap. My mom went for $1,000 per semester. That's a cruel, sick joke now. What colleges have done to pricing should definitely be criminal. Cell phones. I remember looking at phone covers in a store magazine. They were $20. I then realized I had $20 and got so excited to buy a new phone. I got disappointed when I realized they were just covers. Phones were so customizable and diverse back then. I never understood phone financing or the fine print. I remember at the mall once when I was in elementary school I wanted the LG ENV3 and kept begging my mom because it was only $1.99 at Verizon. Didn't realize that you have to pay for the plan. Confession time. At work 10 years ago my boss was complaining that his phone wasn't working. I think it was broken. I said, "Why don't you buy a new one?" He said something like, "I don't have $400. In my defense, I thought it was around $20. Concrete statues. Our neighbors had 2 lions at the end of their driveway, in a very modest neighborhood, and I thought they must be the richest people in the world. On the other side of this, I was eyeing a concrete Bigfoot statue around Mother's Day last year for my mom. And it was $175. Way more than I was expecting. It was about 2 feet tall. Or I'm still ignorant. How much do they cost? Gas during the early 70s. All the adults were saying that it was high. Then they would say that it's coming down. Then back up. Then it's cheap. I never could figure out a median price. In 1974, gas prices rose from 37 cents to 50 cents. While a large spike of 35%, 50c in 1974 money converts to $2.62 in today's money. I'm an adult and I still don't understand people who go around looking for the cheapest gas or even keep an eye out as they are driving. Unless you're in a very unique position, the most you'll be saving is usually a couple of dollars at best. It's just not worth the constant alertness and extra driving to me to have that mindset. It's easier to just skip buying coffee or something else. Pants. Anyone who has ever shopped for pants knows they cost almost triple what a t-shirt costs, double what shorts cost, and the same or slightly less than jackets, hoodies, jumpers. They are a lot more expensive than what you think they are as a child. Video games were crazy expensive, but that's the only thing I cared about. So when I looked at Eggs item I would compare it to video game prices. 40 to 60 USD. In other words, I would look at something and think that costs like half a video game. With that amount I could get 3 video games. That's like a quarter of a video game. I kept doing this until I reached 17. I did similar until I started working. Then things were measured in how long I had to work for. Didn't understand volume. Thought in-app purchases for $1 would never cost anything despite how many times it was bought. Glad my parents had a password. Surprising how many people complain about being broke but don't understand this and keep making tons of tiny purchases. There are plenty of stories of kids who have racked thousands of dollars in-app purchases. A lot of these allowed kids to make purchases without needing to know the password. Well, when I was very young I used to think things' value cost was determined by how many $1 bills could fit into it. As in, to buy a car, stuff it with ones and then that's how much you owe the seller. On a similar note, I, as an adult, was in a store with pick and mix sweets. The ones that are loose in a dispenser and you choose the ones you want into a container, sold by weight. price per quarter as it was in my day. There's a scale next to the display so you can check the price of what you're buying. This kid was with his friends and told them, sincerely as far as I could tell, not as a prank, that you can put things on this machine and it tells you how much they cost. They tried it with pencils, prepackaged candy, etc. I wonder if those friends then went and repeated it to other friends. By that logic, I'm buying an Italian sports car! Exclamation mark. Exclamation mark. Exclamation mark. Exclamation mark. Exclamation mark. Curtains. Never thought of them being valuable. Guess what? If you have someone make them fit your place, they cost a fortune. Curtains are one of the very, very rare things worth sewing. Most garments you can't even come close to breaking even comparing to buying. Curtains are 100% worth sewing. Especially if you have a hard-to-fit window. I go old school and make a bunch of flannel-lined ones that I hang in the winter. Keeps the house a good 5 to 10 degrees warmer. Blinds too. I got a quote for blinds at my house. It was over $18,000. Cut down some off-the-shelf ones from Home Depot and for less than $300. Did the whole house. Always thought clothing was cheap. Wasn't until I was in college that I realized I always had new clothing because my mom never bought anything for herself for like 15 years. I had a similar realization about my mom once I was much older. I always hated going clothes shopping with her because it would take forever. Well, as it turns out, shopping the discount rack is tough to find the right sizing. So it took quite a while for her to find a few super cheap discounted items so that she could get my sister and I name brand clothes. It brought me to fucking tears the day I finally realized that my middle school age son organized his first trip with 3 of his friends to the movies without parents. I bought the tickets beforehand and gave them $40 for snacks and drinks. After dropping him off, I took my youngest to the arcade across from the theater, and while we were there, caught a glimpse of my son walking into the theater with his friends, all of them holding large slushies. My son had a definite holy shit look on his face. When I picked him up a few hours later, he said to me, I offered to buy my friend slushies and told the guy medium, but then he handed us these big-ass drinks and said it was $38. Now ever since, he's been asking me things like, do I have any bonds? Quote, how much does less than radio DJ, animator, doctor greater than make? Quote, how do I get a trust fund? Lol, sorry kid, I just had a little extra from working overtime. Cars for sure. When I was young, I figured just about everyone made something like $75,000 per year salary, so all that money could be spent on a car and would only take 1 year to pay for a real nice car. I mean, if we look at my salary, I could pay off a good, not luxury, car in 5 years. I wouldn't eat, pay any bills or do anything though. Disneyland. Honestly, I didn't really have a guess on how much a ticket was, but we got to go every couple of years, so I figured it was no big deal. I never went to Disney as a kid, but we always went to Six Flags yearly, and made it to other theme parks sometimes. So I have always assumed that it was kind of similar in price. Somewhere between $20 and $50 to get into the park. The cost of parking. I remember it being $12, but that could have changed. And petty cash for lunch. Maybe another $20 if you keep to a loose budget. Pricey, but not anything to break the bank. I assumed that at Disney Vacation cost about that much. Plus a hotel room. Then I looked up what Disney tickets and eating at Disney parks cost. Not even the hotels. And holy shit, this and traveling in general. My single mother took us to Disneyland and some other places as a kid, and I realized now that it must have cost an absolute fortune. My mom used to buy a lot of fancy-looking drinking glasses, and I always tried my best to treat them with care. I broke one of them one time and started to freak out, thinking that my mom would be pissed. She came in and saw the broken glass, and I started profusely apologizing. She laughed and told me that she wasn't mad over a cheap $1 glass from Dollar Tree. I was shook. You reminded me of a time when my boyfriend and I were moving. He was packing our stuff when I wasn't home and he called me panicking and saying that he's sorry and he'll pay me back. When finally he told me what happened, he just lost my beauty blender. And not the original one. Cheap knockoff one worth few dollars. Well, he was very surprised and I couldn't stop laughing. Ooh, that reminds me of the time I broke a plate that had been on the wall for years. I was so terrified my parents would be mad, since they had been displaying the plate twice as long as I had been alive. Turns out it was a present from my dad's mom that my mom had never liked. When writing compositions in primary school, I'd give my characters a $5,000 fine for jaywalking. Singapore? Those self-stick bows you put on gifts. I used to think they were super expensive because everyone in my family used them over and over. We had a few that we used so much they were recognizable. We had a few fancy ones. Wrapping paper too, based on how careful my family was about not tearing it and how my grandmother would fold it. I figured it must be really expensive. Yeah, both are super cheap. I thought pretty much everything was cheaper than it is. It was. Adjusting for inflation, the cost of average goods has risen steadily over the past 30 years while wages have remained flat. Going out to eat, I think I thought it cost like $10 minus 20 or something. I never understood why we didn't go to more restaurants when I was a kid. Thought my mom was just cheap. Turns out feeding a family of 5 at mediocre restaurant can easily cost over $100 if people get drinks, appetizers, and dessert. Video games. I am from Russia. I grew around pirated content and never had a console. I would play on PC and either download stuff from torrents or buy pirated DVDs for literal change, if it wasn't on Rutracker. I remember very vividly buying COD MW and FIFA 2008 around release date for 200 rub. $3 each. I was shocked when I learned how much real games for PS3 and Xbox 360 cost. Had a friend from Peru who basically went through the same thing. Was utterly shocked when he went into a FI and saw the prices on albums and movies. He legitimately thought they'd moved the decimal point on the sticker to overcharge you. Medical care. My parents both had government jobs with good insurance, so they didn't even have to pay copays. Partly because of inflation since the 90s, and partly because I lived in a cheap area. I remember thinking that a house over $100,000 was only for the rich people. Now, where I live, you literally cannot buy a single wide trailer for $100,000. Lego bricks. When I was a kid, I remember having hundreds of them, but now a box of like 100 pieces is over $15. 100 Legos is actually not a lot of Legos. I have a teen who used to love Legos. Being of modest means, I slowly built up her Lego empire over 10 years. She especially loved the minifigs and they were pricey. I've spent hundreds on Legos over the years and only bought one small set. An RV camper. Sets can be crazy expensive. Thankfully Legos will last forever, so I am holding on to it for her children, lol. Or to gift it to someone who will appreciate it. Toys in general. As an adult I realized they were crazy expensive. I remember wanting to have the cheapest beverage at a theme park with my aunt and uncle when I was 11. I insisted on having water, while they were subtly nudging me towards milk. Milk was cheaper. Who knew? Me, as a teacher. I thought when I became a teacher, I was looking at $30K a year. I make way more than that, and I'm just getting started. Well, that's uplifting to hear. Paper towels. My mother was so stingy with the things it was pointless to even have them in the house. A family of 4 kids and we'd go through a roll a month. Not me, but my son when he was about 4 or 5. On seeing a man getting out of a Porsche convertible, asked in a big loud voice, "Dad, has that Mons car got no roof because he is poor and can't afford one?" Quote. The guy's face was a picture, made even better when I just replied, "That's right, son. I thought wheat bread was way more expensive than white. My siblings and I would always ask for wheat bread, and it was my mom's favorite as well, but we almost never got it. Turns out, my dad only likes white bread. It wasn't a price thing. It was just selfishness." N64 games in 2020. That system is like 20 years old. Why is GoldenEye still $60? At this point, collectors, I'm sure you could have found it dirt cheap in the late 90s, early 2000s. Meat for expensive and veggies for cheap. As a kid, it's all food and you think they're in the same magnitude. But I was surprised to see how big the difference in prices. Bar drinks. Never understood why so much value was placed on the whole transaction. Now, as an adult, I fully understand and welcome the phrases "drinks on me" or "open bar." A coffee pot. Not the machine itself, the actual glass coffee pot. When I was 5 or 6, my mom had just separated from my dad, and we were living with my aunt. I had a stuffed animal I used to carry around with me. And one day I was a little careless with it, and I knocked the stuffed animal into the coffee pot. It fell on the floor and broke. My aunt was so upset and made a huge deal out of it and how I was going to have to pay for it. Being 5, I had no money obviously, so I didn't know how I was going to pay for it. My mom was also very upset at me for breaking it, so I just figured that my mom was going to go broke having to replace that coffee pot. Every Hot Wheels Matchbox car. I had one car from the 70s and my mom told me that car is worth a lot of money, and I thought all of my cars were worth the same amount. I had around 100 cars. Vanilla extract. I figured since everyone bakes it would be cheap. Boy, is it not cheap. I stood on our toilet seat and broke it when I was around 10. I was so upset thinking that it was the biggest mistake of my life and would cost my parents so much money. I replaced my toilet seat last week and it cost me $6. Cheese. Oh my god. I am absolutely horrified at the amount of cheese I ate as a child. And I have no clue how my parents were able to supply that much cheese, considering how freaking expensive it is. I will forever feel guilty for this cheeky smiley face. Honestly, that was my biggest realization when I went to university. It's crazy how expensive cheese is. Gasoline and clothes, as well as food. Fast food. It's very expensive when you're feeding 5. Furniture. When I went to look for a sofa for the first time ever, I was thinking how much could a couch possibly cost. 100 maybe? 500 for a really nice one. Maybe 1,000 or something for the really big ones with electric recliners and consoles. Oh boy, was I in for a shock. Ended up finding a glorious old lady couch at a Goodwill for $150. We put the pieces, 3 total, one at a time, on top of a sedan and got friends to reach out the windows and hold the foot pegs to transport it. Yeah, makes me appreciate why my mom didn't want me climbing on the arms of the couches. Not quite the answer you're looking for, but I never understood why we couldn't just print more money when we needed it until I got older. Time. I thought I'd have forever to do the things I want and just procrastinated. Too many missed opportunities. The school summer holiday lasted forever. Cruise ships. Everyone else's parents seemed to fly them everywhere and catch a cruise, and everyone would always take a vacation somewhere that sounded exotic. I always thought, it's just a boat. You're trapped, traveling really slow to your destination. How much could it be? Quote, expensive cheap is all relative, I guess. But any time I visited a friend's house when I was in like late elementary school, late 1990s, and they had any of the following items, I automatically assumed they were loaded. I'd say the things you listed are still a symbol of immense wealth, and I kind of envy you living a life in which having a swimming pool could be a thing for people not considered loaded. I believe here in my developing country, the top 3 on your list are still considered things only owned by above average family. Pool, air hockey tables aren't all that expensive. What is expensive is the extra living space that is discretionary enough that you can just stick a large unit just for entertainment there. Although I suppose that has some qualifiers. Certainly you can stick a pool table in an unfinished basement or garage. But if you have a finished room dedicated to a pool table, that's pretty bougie. Humongous television. Visible TV size versus wealth is a bell curve. The very poor have no or a small TV, which increases in size until upper middle class. But rich people hide their TVs, either behind some fancy cabinets or in its own separate room that's not visible to guests. The ultra-rich don't have time for TV. Picture frames. My family bought one for a decent-sized oil painting in our living room, and I remember it being like $200. Even now I am reluctant buying nice quality 4x6 frames or frames for my school degrees. A house. I thought since everyone I knew had a house, they were just kind of like a piece of clothing. Affordable enough that everyone could have one. Oof. Boy was I wrong.